A&A eLearning Academy is brought to you by CDN Graysheet, a trusted source of rare coin and currency valuations since 1963.
My name is Andy Dickus. I'm here at A&A headquarters in Colorado Springs. Thanks for joining us at the A&A's eLearning Academy. We'd like to thank the Graysheet for their continued sponsorship of our eLearning Academy program. And today we've got kind of a treat, I think. Most of you probably know or know of Bob Bair. He's been involved in numismatics since 1956, first as a collector, then as a coin dealer. Growing up in northwestern Wisconsin in the 1950s, he began collecting coins when he started receiving coins from a newspaper route, and a lifelong passion was born. Bob earned master's degrees in U.S. history and educational administration. He taught in Wisconsin for 30 years and served as a school principal in Louisiana and Colorado. And today, Bob's going to be talking about a real power couple in numismatic design, Laura Gardin Fraser and James Earle Fraser, prolific in coins, medallic art, obviously a very influential artistic design couple in our country's history. So if you have any questions for Bob, please post them in the Q&A function down below. If you just want to talk shop or talk about some of the coins that you may have, something like that, please use the chat function for that. We'll go ahead and get started. Bob, I'm going to turn it over to you.
I appreciate it, Andy. Thanks to you and thanks to the A&A and the Graysheet for making this possible. This gives me a chance as an old former teacher to once again undertake something hopefully educational and fun. I'll give you some background very quickly to what got me going on this project. My wife and I live in Denver, and I was interested in doing some research. I'd been in history grad school and all that stuff and did research, and I like to write and present. So I started searching to see what I could find on Laura Gardin Fraser and James Earle Fraser. Basically, there are three places where their papers and their materials are. Syracuse University has some, the Smithsonian has some, and the National Cowboy and Western Museum in Oklahoma City has some. And that's not too far away from us. So in 2016, I went to my wife and said, "Hey, Connie, you got some vacation time built up. Let's take a 3-day research trip to Oklahoma City and see what we can find out about the Frasers." So we loaded up the car and headed down to Oklahoma City to the National Cowboy and Western Museum because their materials on the Frasers weren't digitalized. I called the chief archivist and said, "What do you have?" Turned out it was 8 gigantic cardboard boxes about 4 feet high and about 3 feet wide, just filled with Fraser papers, categorized really only by decade, pretty much, with things just kind of lumped in the boxes. So Connie and I spent 3 days, 8 hours or 10 hours a day, sorting through what was in there. We were the first ones that had been in there since 1968, we were told. And just, I came to know and appreciate both Frasers just incredibly well and to a great degree because of getting to know them through what they'd left behind in their papers with the National Cowboy and Western Museum. Laura in particular, she kept diaries every year, and it was such fun to read her diaries from throughout her life. It really gave me a look at her that was pretty cool. But these people are special. Let's get going with the presentation now. They did incredible numismatic things. We're going to see that. But geez, as sculptors and medallic artists, what a couple, what a pair. That quotation at the bottom of the first slide from Edith Hamilton, who's written great mythology books and others, a path we never thought to tread, God found for us. So this has come to pass. Yeah, God found a path for these two people, and what they achieved while walking that path is just incredible. Okay, let's take a look. All right, if I can get it to go. Okay, I can't make my slide move. I don't know why that is. Tech help. Oh, there it goes. Okay, good. All right. So who are these two? Well, they're incredibly talented sculptors, artists, just designers of some of the most beautiful coins and so on ever made in the US. They must have been related, huh? Yeah. They were married for 40 years, totally in love. And that was part of what I enjoyed, aside from seeing what they created, seeing the relationship, the love relationship that they had their entire lives long was really wonderful and enlightening for me. As the text says, they inspired each other incredibly. And those who saw their work were inspired by it as well. They accomplished a lot, huh? Yeah, over the first half of the 20th century, they did hundreds of sculptures, medals, and coin designs as well. Just an amazingly talented and prolific couple. Well, this was their life. There's nothing but art. Art is living, and they lived with and for art, individually and as a couple. How did Laura get started? Her mother was an artist as well, and Laura was one of three daughters, all of whom were encouraged by their mom. And Laura started out modeling in clay and liked it and had some talent, and obviously went on from there. After she graduated from high school, off to Columbia University, she joined the Art Students League there. That was her interest, and she could tell that was going to be her life. She had James Earle Fraser as a teacher in the Art Students League. She worked together with him. She fell in love with him, and he did with her. They got married in 1913. All right, she widely respected for her work with heroic sculptors, commissioned medals, coin designs for commemorative half dollars especially. And this is worth noting, in spite of being a woman in a male-dominated field during a period of accepted societal male chauvinism, Laura carved a path. She followed her path and succeeded wonderfully well with it. Here's a quotation from Laura. Jimmy and I had standing jokes between us. One of them was when I finished a job and it was presented, we would wager as to how long it would be before someone would comment to me, bet Mr. Fraser helped you on this one. One time in fun, I snapped back at a wealthy patron. Just who is this James Earle Fraser I keep hearing about? A good comeback by Laura. Mother, whom we affectionately called Neo, was a talented painter and musician. She taught us girls and encouraged us to study the arts. So that there was a mentor right there that was her mom as well, who got her going on a path where her talent could and would and did emerge. Oh, this is Laura in old age. Behind her is a part of, this was at the National Cowboy and Western Museum. It shows the Oklahoma land rush. It was commissioned initially to James. We'll see a full size of it later. But after James died, and as he was fading due to health issues, Laura ended up finishing it in a way that he wanted. But here, this is characteristic of both of those two. Here's a quotation from Ulysses by Tennyson about what keeps you going when you're old? Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Neither one of these two ever yielded, even as the inevitable encroachment of old age began to impact them. The year following our marriage, Laura recalled, we bought a party in Westport. That's Westport, Connecticut, which then became kind of an informal artist center. Lots of other artists moved to that area, in part because those guys were there. Our home was colonial in origin. We could date it back more than 200 years. We built our studio in the center of 40 acres that they had. We designed it for our future together, and that line is so important. Yes, they did. It was 30 feet by 60 feet and a story and a half high, and each of them had half of it, and they worked independently. And that was their life. That was their day in the studio with each other, each doing their separate projects. Big as it was, we kept it full most of the time. We loved it. Yes, they loved their life together, and they loved the creativity and the talent that they were able to express individually and together on at least one occasion. Here's look at the size of this. This shows Laura working on statues of Lee and Grant that Baltimore, which was a divided city during the Civil War, a lot of Southern sentiment as well as some Northern sentiment. But starting in 1936, there was a competition held to commission someone to do gigantic statues of Lee and Stonewall Jackson. Now, currently, and this has been true for 4 or 5 years, those statues are likely to be moved to the Chancellorsville battlefield, where both Lee and Jackson had involvement, and where Jackson ended up being shot by one of his own sentries by accident and dying 3 days later. But rather than commemorate Southern history as representing the city of Baltimore, it seemed appropriate in this time to honor these two historic figures at a major battlefield of the Civil War, Chancellorsville. And as far as I know, that's where these statues will end up. But Laura spent 12 years on these two. She'll comment on that in an upcoming slide. Yeah, here it is on her Lee and Jackson equestrian statues. Hard work, horses, which she loved. By the way, Laura started on the 40 acres they had in Westport. She got some of her lady friends together to do a ladies polo league, because they all loved horses and had horses. Westport was still rural enough that they could do that. So they played polo in some vacant land that was part of the 40 acres. Hard work, horses, research, and imagination went into the statues, and 12 years of my life. A sculptor's life is measured in large chunks of time. Yeah, you don't do this overnight. A statue like the Lee and Jackson becomes part of you. It's like having a child. Of course, there's no satisfaction quite like that of a beautifully complete and acceptable creation. Jimmy, and she always called him Jimmy in her diary. By the way, every time an anniversary, they were married in November of 1913. Every year when it was her anniversary, I'm reading all her diaries, when it came to the anniversary day, she would write, "Today is our anniversary," followed by about 6 exclamation points. Exclamation, 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 exclamation. Their love was special that they had for each other. And when she says, "Jimmy liked my Lee and Jackson," that was enough. Jimmy never told her what to do or how to do it. But all right, Jimmy, what do you think of this? I like it. That was a supreme compliment, and one that she obviously appreciated. Here's an example of a medal that she was commissioned to do after World War I to honor chaplains. Shows a World War I chaplain offering a canteen of water to a gravely wounded soldier. And all who were chaplains for the U.S. In World War I received one of these. Here we go with a medal honoring Charles Lindbergh after his flight across the Atlantic in 1927. I have one of those. Congress commissioned those. As you can see, Medal of the Congress. There's the Lone Eagle on the back, and I've always wondered, and I don't know, whether Lindbergh getting the name the Lone Eagle, or the nickname the Lone Eagle, came from this medallion, or whether Laura knew of that name, which had been given, for instance, by the press, and then decided that would be the reverse, to show a lone eagle crossing the ocean with a rising sun behind. I got a sample of that on eBay. I checked this morning. There's one on eBay for $43 or something like that. So I think they made many of these under the act of Congress that commissioned these, and many have survived. Here's Laura's first commemorative, 1919, the Alabama commemorative. And that commemorative showed Kirby, the living governor of Alabama, along with Alabama's first governor, indicating a centennial from 1819 to 1919, the 100th anniversary of statehood for Alabama. Laura did, we'll see other commemoratives that she did in succeeding slides, but this was the first one, and this is a good start for Laura with her talent, with her medallic talent, and succeeding so well with this design, then being commissioned for others as well. Here's another one that she did. This is done as a classic commemorative $50, but also as $1 golds with and without stars. I'm not much of an artist myself, not at all really, but I've read some commentary on the reverse in particular, very skillfully showing even the leaves on the trees surrounding the cabin where Grant was born. But a very cool design once again, and very well executed by Laura. Oh, here we go with the Vancouver, 1925. She's on a roll now. She's well known. And Andrew Mellon, who was Secretary of the Treasury, then as Secretary later, we're going to see that when we come to her design for the quarter that John Flanagan won out on. More on that in just a minute. But here's Fort Vancouver showing McLaughlin, who started the Fort Vancouver, and then the centennial of Fort Vancouver, represented by a pioneer with a rifle. This is probably the greatest single commemorative of the classic commemorative series, my opinion certainly, but I'm not alone on that. This is done by both of them. Laura, to your left, here's the Native American, the Indian, with his hand outstretched, trying to stop the westward migration of Americans and Europeans. The Oregon Trail, the covered wagons are shown behind the Indian as he's vainly trying to stop them. So Laura designed that, and James designed the reverse that shows one of the covered wagons moving westward, inexorably westward, making the Native American way of life an endangered species, so to speak, as more and more of our ancestors moved west. But this is just, it was done from 1926 to 1938, I think it was, maybe 39, where the commission, Ezra Meeker, who was a young guy, had journeyed with his parents along the Oregon Trail, was one of the major people interested in getting publicity for the Oregon Trail and for marking it before it was completely, wiped out by civilization as cities expanded and so on. So every year from 26 to, it was 39. Obviously, this coin has that date on it. These $50 were issued as all commemoratives of that era were, to try to raise money for a cause, in this case, to commemorate and memorialize the Oregon Trail. Oh, here we come to a great design for a quarter. Laura's design that you see here on the 1999 Washington Gold Commemorative, the 275th anniversary of Washington's birth in 1732, that won a competition that should in some ways have put it on the quarter. Andrew Mellon, the same Secretary of the Treasury who had approved Laura's designs for Alabama and Vancouver and the Oregon Trail, for all of her prior ones, chose John Flanagan for reasons that aren't clear to me, but it probably wasn't male chauvinism in this case, because why would he have okayed this woman's designs for 3.5 commemoratives and then because of chauvinism denied her for the quarter? I'm glad the design is gorgeous, and I'm glad that it's come up, that it's been used on the gold commemorative. I've got one of those just because I think the design is so cool. Yeah, and Flanagan, interestingly enough, he was just a young guy starting out then. That was the first and only coin he ever designed. So I don't know if Mellon was, trying to encourage him or prepare him for future designs for other coins or not, but that didn't happen. He got the quarter, and Laura's design sat for 77 years until it reemerged on the gold commem. This one she did, and I found lots of commentary on this. I managed to put together an article on Laura's creation of the Macarthur peso and half peso for the Philippines, and the controversy that she had with the mint. In a quick nutshell, what you see here is the design as it was done. Laura had designed a high relief Macarthur and Philippine shield on the reverse that basically John Sinek, who was director of the mint, was a friend of both Frasers. Unfortunately, before Laura completed her high relief design, Sinek died. And after his death, Laura could tell that the mint production people were not going to be receptive to a high relief. She did everything she could behind the scenes, getting the Philippine ambassador and so on to support her high relief design. But she was working against the production people who thought, dang it, every time we've tried high reliefs, like with the 1921 peace dollar and the 1907 high relief saint, the dies crack and we have to use a lot of pressure, and it's a production pain. We want to flatten the relief. Ultimately, as you can see, the pragmatic production people won out, but Laura did everything she could to fight for the artistic design that she had created that was really a stunning high relief of both. It just didn't happen. This was what had been commissioned to James. James was internationally famous for the work that he did in so many areas. We're going to see a lot of his major works in Washington, D.C. shortly, but this portrays the Oklahoma land rush. And just this sculptor shows you the motion and the hurry of these guys. Presumably legally started out in 1903 in the land rush. The reason the Oklahoma football team is called the Sooners is because, as you probably know, some number of people had scouted out prime locations, and they wanted to lay claim to it when before it was officially done. So they, before the day when the land rush was to take place, they went out and camped overnight or whatever. So they were there sooner than these guys who are following the rules and taking off all at once to try to lay claim to prime stretches of land in what is now Oklahoma. But Laura finished this up as James was fading and approaching death because he couldn't quite bring it to conclusion. But she kept true to his design and finished it for him. This is at the Oklahoma City National Cowboy and Western Museum. Now we come to James. What a guy. He grew up in South Dakota. His dad was a conductor for the railroad, so he moved around a bit. He was in South Dakota and Minnesota, Illinois, and so on. But especially growing up in South Dakota, he had a lot of exposure to Native Americans or Indians with whom he sympathized, by whom he was influenced. His dad said at one point, boy, we're just going to keep forcing those Indians west until they end up in the Pacific. And, James quoted him in some of his writings. But James developed as an artist as well in some interesting ways. He attended the Art Institute in Chicago and then had the opportunity to go to Paris. We'll hear a quotation from James on that in a second. Augustus St. Gaudens, America's premier sculptor of the late 19th century, took on James as an assistant, realizing the talent that James had. And that not only helped James's resume, of course, but he had a chance to get exposure and some mentoring from Augustus St. Gaudens, and it doesn't get any better than that. Now we come to where he becomes a teacher and a director at the Art Students League, where he meets Laura Gardin and falls in love with her, and she with him, and they're married in 1913. We're going to see his End of the Trail, which is just iconic, a huge 18-foot tall original statue. And James learned something from this. James was just a young pup starting out. In 1894, he had done some models of End of the Trail. The Indian slumped over on his pony as he realizes his life, the Native American or Indian lifestyle, has reached the end of the trail as white civilization keeps moving westward inexorably. But James didn't copyright this. It was his first major work, really. And by not copywriting it, all kinds of money was made by people copying it, but he didn't get a penny for it. He did display the original in 1915 at the Pan Pac exposition. And there's quite a story about how it ended up. The acquisition director at the National Cowboy and Western Museum, a guy named Dean Crackle, wanted to track that down because he thought it would be a good thing to have at the National Cowboy and Western Museum. And it is there now. Crackle had to go through all kinds of negotiation to even find it. It was rotting away in a park in Visalia, California, where it had been transported or whatever after the Pan Pac Expo. And Crackle got it, basically bought it with funding from the National Cowboy and Western Museum and replaced the original, which was plaster, with a bronze in Visalia, in the park in Visalia, where it had been sitting for years. Now it's in Oklahoma City, and we'll see some pictures of that. But all right, Fraser's ability, all kinds of heroic sculptures, I'll say it yet. But he also did many medals and coin designs. Obviously, what we call the Buffalo nickel is equally iconic as this End of the Trail. He was a great teacher, Laura recalled. Jimmy, and she always called him Jimmy. Jimmy had the rare quality of being able to recognize what someone felt. He never liked to work in one specific manner. He encouraged individualism. Everyone loved him, especially me. Yeah, she did, and he loved her. His friend Barry Faulkner described him this way: his character was like a good piece of Scotch tweed, handsome, durable, and warm. He was a good person, as well as being an incredibly talented and in-demand sculptor in the 20th century. Here's Jimmy talking. Father was not sure I should study art. He thought I might be a failure. This was back at the turn of the century. So he sought the advice of his friend, Sir William Van Horn, who was an artist and art connoisseur. I was asked to bring my photographs and drawings so that he might judge them. I shall always be thankful to him, for he approved, Van Horn approved my studying art. I then found myself on an ocean liner sailing for France and to schools in Paris. That got him started. Here's a cool Lincoln that he did. This original Lincoln was put up as a bronze at the start of the New Jersey Turnpike. It's still there as far as I know, although there's a plaster model of it that is pretty much life size at the National Cowboy and Western Museum, which, by the way, is a very cool place to go. Connie and I spent 3 days in the basement looking through cardboard boxes of Fraser papers, but not exclusively that. We roamed the museum a bit, and it really is an impressive variety of items displaying the history of the American West. Well, here's what happens when you're an artist. It gives the highest quality to your moments as they pass in this life. And here's Jimmy working away on one of his gigantic sculptures. Look at the size of this one. Holy cow. To accomplish great things, we must not only act, but also dream, not only plan, but also believe. Look at how Jimmy has put that together in the studio. That ended up in Washington, D.C., one of many of his works that did. There was a stamp that featured his work for the American Bar Association. The figures shown on the stamp are all designed by Jimmy and are on display, as it says, over the Supreme Court. This frieze is on the Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. And here's a kind of a tribute. You could buy a first day cover of the stamp for the American Bar Association and find this information out on Jimmy. Here's one of the models that he did for his end of the trail. The Indian slumped over on his pony. Even the pony looks depressed here, but he did his version that was displayed at the Panpack Exposition in 1915 and is now in Oklahoma City is 18 feet tall, 3 times life size or so. It's just huge. Some more on that in a bit. This is a bronze. A guy named Clarence Schaller from my home state of Wisconsin, who lived in Waupun, and he was an industrialist. He made umbrellas. He made vulcanized tire patches in the early days of cars and headlights and stuff. But he also, Schaller was also a good sculptor, and he and Fraser knew one another from their connection in that way. And Schaller, who had a lot of money from his industrial achievements, when he saw End of the Trail, said, I got to have one to put up in what became Schaller Park in Waupun, Wisconsin, which is kind of a medium-sized city in Wisconsin, probably about 50 miles from both Madison and Milwaukee, north of Madison and west of Milwaukee. But that is where you can see, other than going to Oklahoma City, to see a 3 times life-size version of End of the Trail. Here's his Pony Express medal. Fraser, and that reverse sure looks like the Oregon Commemorative. I think this was a start for it. But he loved to show motion. As you can see, the Pony Express rider on the front, with his pistol, taking a shot at some Indians that are pursuing him to kill him, while the Pony Express guy's just trying to get through and deliver the mail. This was given to all 5 million of the U.S. military who'd been involved in World War I. The World War I Peace Medal or Memorial Medal given to all soldiers and sailors and aviators and everyone involved. Here's the second highest award to the Congressional Medal of Honor, the Naval Cross, designed by James Earle Fraser. This guy, he had commissions all the time. He was constantly busy, and so was Laura. But what a great life for both of them. I mean, art is life. This was what they wanted to do, and this was their talent, and they were so able to express it in so many ways. If you go to the Supreme Court building, Lex is Latin for law. Here's the Supreme Court building where the guardian of law is there, designed and sculpted by James Earle Fraser. Here's this is at the National Archives, where you see the same sort of design of Fraser's. He's in many places, but a lot in Washington, D.C., as you can see from this. Here's Patton, General George Patton, the guy who was constantly chasing the Nazis, ready to fight them. This is at West Point. It was one of James Earle Fraser's last achieved commissions as his health was fading and he was approaching death. But this is available at West Point, and it gives the personality of Patton as well as the talent of James Earle Fraser. Here's a couple of the gigantic ones. This is near the Lincoln Memorial, done by Fraser. These are among his last works as well. He died in 1953, so he would have been working on this in the late 40s and into the early 50s. Here's the Norse Medal. This was legislated as a medal rather than a coin, but it's considered, there's a Norse thick and a Norse thin that are part of the classic commemorative series that were designed to recognize and honor the Viking or the Norse. We could probably say colonization safely. Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, but the Norse were there 400 or 500 years prior to that. And traces of their civilization have been found to establish that if anyone discovered America, it was some of these Norse Viking types. The iconic buffalo, we call it the buffalo nickel. Of course, it's really a bison. Fraser used 3 Native Americans to make a composite. He didn't want to do any one person or one tribe, but he wanted to do a type that represented the Native American or the American Indian generally, rather than as strictly, a Lakota or a Cheyenne or something like that. And the buffalo, the bison on the back is almost certainly Bronx, who was kept at the Bronx Zoo rather than Black Diamond. We'll have a little, just a quick story on that. This is probably a good place for it. Fraser didn't keep real close track of his models. He was so busy with commissions all the time, it wasn't too important to him. He got 3 Native Americans together. He got Iron Tail, a Lakota. He got Big Tree, who was, he indicated different people at different times. 2 Moons, a Cheyenne, was definitely a model, and Iron Tail was definitely a model. Maybe Big Tree, a Kiowa, was as well. Fraser had different statements on that at different times. But he spoke about going to the Bronx Zoo, where he wanted to get the buffalo to turn sideways so he could get the design for the buffalo nickel. And the bull, who was heading the herd, Fraser said he spent a couple of hours. No matter where Fraser walked, the buffalo would turn, so that he was always looking at Fraser, because the buffalo could tell Fraser wanted to see him somehow, and the buffalo wasn't sure what to make of that, so he wasn't going to turn his side. Finally, obviously that worked out. But Black Diamond, who has been credited for it, and this isn't just me talking, Q. David Bowers, I think, noted this first, the famous writer. If you compare the horns on the buffalo nickel with the existing head of Black Diamond, the horns don't match. They're at a different angle on the head of Black Diamond. Black Diamond was at the Central Park Zoo. Almost certainly, in spite of publicity to the contrary, almost certainly the model for the buffalo on the reverse was Bronx rather than Black Diamond. But okay, we'll go with it in any event. It's an iconic and beautiful coin. Jimmy and I simply wore ourselves out working. We were incapable of resisting a challenge during our allotted 70. Our bodies were never able to keep up with our minds, nor the insatiable desire that possessed us to create something bigger and more beautiful for America. This is what motivated these people, letting the art that was in them come out and be expressed. But why are they doing it? For America, for all of us. I shall light a candle of understanding in thine heart, which shall not be put out. Their whole life, each person, their whole life long was dedicated to creating something bigger and more beautiful for America and expressing their art. This is their studio in Westport, 30 by 60 by a story and a half tall. Because this was what the Frasers did, this was their life. Art was their life. They'd usually work until midnight or thereabouts in their separate halves of the studio. And then at about midnight at night, they were about 200 yards from their house because they had 40 acres and put up the studio obviously on an open stretch. But they would walk back to their house at about midnight, many times holding hands and not saying a word, just listening to the hoot owls hoot and the peepers in the pond peep, sometimes talking about what they'd accomplished that day and what their hopes were tomorrow. But they were together. And then they'd go to bed, they'd sleep until 10 in the morning or something like that, have breakfast and go back and do it again. And whatever art they were doing to make it bigger and more beautiful for America, they did. But they did it, they did their work individually, but they were together always. Oh, this was the end for James Earle Fraser. We see his last words there. Two hearts that beat as one is the end of the quotation up above. Yeah, their two hearts always did. Laura said, we talked and laughed and competed all our lives. When we weren't working, we were talking, and we never grew tired of each other or ran out of subject matter to discuss or argue about. We could spend literally days discussing a play or a concert. Good acting always thrilled us, as did the strength and beauty of poetic writing. Of course, our own creative work was our life. I added that emphasis. It was that way to the end. A few minutes before Jimmy passed away, I sat on the edge of his bed and started talking about us doing a Lincoln together, a statue of Lincoln together. He just beamed with excitement. I didn't want him to overexert himself, so I thought I better leave. I got up and walked to the door, then turned around and looked at Jimmy. He raised his head, nodded, and looked at me, smiled, and said, by golly, Laura, we'll do a colossal Lincoln together. He slumped back in the bed and never said another word and died shortly after that. You know, I don't have anything to say about this, but it's my hope that somewhere that those two are together and that they've been given by divine power a block of marble the size of Mount Everest and the original Lincoln to pose for them any way they want. And those two have an eternity together to make a colossal Lincoln together. I would like to imagine that as a possibility. Who knows? Nothing shall part us in our love until Thanatos, who was the ancient Greek god of death, at his appointed hour, removed us from the light of day. Laura died of a stroke in 1966. Jimmy had died in 1953. Laura continued expressing her art and doing big and beautiful things for America in that studio until she had her stroke and died. But nothing parted those two in any way during the 40 years that they were together. Now that really ends the presentation on the two, but I have a half dozen or so pictures that show each of them and both of them at different stages of their lives and career. And it's fun to look at them. In the ones where they are with items that they're working on, you can just see their focus and their concentration and their desire to make something big and beautiful for America and to express their talent. So let's take a quick look at some of these pictures. Here's Laura. Yeah, that's one of the gigantic horses that she worked on. There are the two as young marrieds. There's Laura in the studio. There's Laura seated between her Lee and Jackson statues. That picture's from a newspaper. It was the only copy I could find. There's Laura, once again, working on a horse. She loved horses and dogs in particular. I mean, she took lots of commissions in other areas, but anything that could have a horse as part of it or a dog as part of it was her area. She loved it. But look at her focus on that as she's looking at the hoof to make sure, okay, am I getting this hoof just the way it should be, the way it really is on a horse? Here's Laura Younger, once again, working on a horse. Well, here's James with the iconic, there's a 1913 Type 1 buffalo, as we call it, nickel. Look at James focusing on that. He's almost done with this gigantic sculpture, but he's looking at it, all right, do I have that nose just the way it should be, just the way I want it? The focus is intense. Here he is focused on a smaller work. Oh, and here we are. This is what you'll see if you go to the National Cowboy and Western Museum in Oklahoma City. And they have done, Dean Crackle got this, but they very wisely put this. When you come to the main entrance of the National Cowboy and Western Museum and open the door, there's about a 70-yard long corridor that goes to the end of the trail statue. That's what you see as you approach it. And it's well naturally lighted on three sides, as you can see from the windows. I sat for a while at a bench not far from end of the trail and just watched as people came in. And it was especially interesting with kids. I was an 8th grade teacher for 25 years or so. And 8th graders being what they are, I thought, okay, I wonder how they're going to be in this museum. Without exception, and I didn't spend hours at this, but I spent some time watching people come in. When kind of teens and preteens would come in, they'd come walking down the 70-yard or so long corridor, just looking at this statue. When they got up close to it, they're not talking, they're not screwing around. They're walking around it, looking at it, really in awe and respect. It's the power of that statue by James Earle Fraser, which thank heavens the National Cowboy and Western Museum got it away from the elements where it was decaying. It took about a year to fully restore it. It had some cracks and some places where plaster had fallen off or whatever, but it was lovingly and carefully restored. And it is just the highlight of the National Cowboy and Western Museum that you see from the moment you walk in the door. And it's a good tribute, not just to James Earle Fraser, who designed it, but to the Native American and the Native Americans' way of life as well. So there we are, folks. That's the presentation. I guess. All right, now let's see if I stop screen sharing now. I think we'll just be back to me with Andy. Yeah, there's Andy. Okay, and I'm checking out of the program. So I guess, if there are questions or comments, or if people want to, refer back to a given slide or something like that, we can do whatever our audience would like, Andy. I'm up for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody that has any questions or, clarifications of certain slides, let us know. We do have one question, and I was actually wondering about this too. Is there a studio in Westport similar to the St. Gaudens place in, is it Vermont or New Hampshire, I believe?
New Hampshire.
Is there like a museum or a historic site in Westport?
That's a good question. I bet the original studio is still there, but I've not been there. I don't know. A lot of, okay, once again, I'm trying to think, the places that have Fraser materials are the Smithsonian and Syracuse University. Is there a museum there? Good question. I don't know. I've never looked at that. Boy, that's something I really should have done ahead of time to see. Yeah, is there something there besides the original studio? I guess I'd be surprised if if at least the original studio isn't there as kind of a museum. I mean, I don't think it would have been torn down or anything like that. I couldn't imagine that happening. But I really don't have a definitive answer to that one, Andy.
That's yeah, I'm gonna have to Google that. Because I know there's one for St. Gaudens up in New Hampshire, but yeah,
Right.
I didn't know about anyone in Westport. So does anybody else have any questions for Bob? Well, Bob, I certainly learned a lot today. I hope everybody that logged in also learned quite a bit. Our new exhibit coming up here in Colorado Springs is the Medal in America, and we're certainly going to be focusing on these two decorated sculptors and some of their works. So I certainly appreciate the knowledge, Bob.
Okay, and I should show the two Laura Fraser medals that I've acquired. I mentioned on eBay that there's still one. Here's the Lindbergh with the lone eagle flying across the Atlantic, and here's one she did for the Irish Setter Club, portraying an Irish setter, obviously. But I ran into the Lindbergh medal on eBay and got this. The Irish Setter one from Stacks and Bowers auction. So her work is out there, and I think James is as well, and is somewhat accessible if you are interested in acquiring something.
I'm also putting together a case that we're going to have on the Society of Medalists, and Laura Gardin Fraser actually designed the first of that set of medals, and it features a dog on a hunt as well. It's a great medal. So. Bob, thanks for your continuing support of the ANA through your presentations. I know Bob does a lot of things at our conventions as well. We appreciate everybody for coming today. Again, the Gray Sheet has been instrumental in support of this program. So thank you again to the Gray Sheet. Thanks to you, Bob. Thank you to the Frasers for all of their artistic contributions to our country. And please join us for more e-learning presentations. You can see a schedule of them on money.org. We're going to be going through a few more in December and then continuing in January. Also, we are doing summer seminar again this year here in Colorado Springs. So folks that have not been out here, we've been doing it virtually for the last couple of years, but it's just not the same. So we'd like to see anybody who is willing to come out to Colorado Springs this summer and immerse yourself in numismatics. So again, thanks to everyone and have a good day.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, participants. I appreciate it.